So I want to start and talk about what makes a good skin texture and what makes a bad skin texture. So as you can see, I collected a lot of references for Lord Varies, but we're just going to be focusing on these images right here. So I'm going to start with what makes a bad skin texture. I see this online a lot, people slapping yellows, reds and hoping it will look like a character and just work out. Don't do this technique, it tends to only work for creatures. The approach you should be taking is starting with a base skin tone, having a lot of good references and working closely with your baked maps so your color sort of matches your sculpted details. Without looking at material mode, you can kind of tell how old this guy is and what sort of skin imperfection he has because they worked closely with the baked maps. As you can see, the pores, the lines on his face. Another bad example might be this. It's just a flat skin texture. You can't see any details in the face, and it'll just end up sort of looking like this. Can't really tell what imperfection the character has on the face. Doesn't look realistic. So with Lord Varies, how he's tanned on the show, but in real life he's quite pale. But for my texture, I wanted to go with an in-between. I just sort of wanted to have a bit of artistic freedom, so I decided to go for more in-between. Here are some examples of really good skin textures. For example, this water white, you can see the freckles. These are the sort of details you want to be putting into your character. You can see there's a lot of freckles in his forehead, which shows a bit of aging. It's got a bit of a bruise on his face to add a bit of more character to him. This is what sort of sells your character, you know, put in a bit of yellows, put a bit of purple. This shows aging, as well as this female as well. You can see there's a lot of dark patches on her eyelids. Maybe she's not sleeping very well. She's got a lot of reds on her cheeks. Maybe that's a blusher, or that's just sort of a rash on her face. This is sort of the approach you should be taking, and this is sort of the image you should be looking at to help you to create your own work. So with that being said, let's get started on texturing Lord Varies. So this is my final character texture. As you can see, I went for an in-between pale and tanned. So what I'm going to be doing is going through my bottom layer and working my way to the top. It just saves us time and I can focus more on talking about the technique. So by default, Substance Painter sets your environment map to something random. I tend to leave my environment map to Studio 3. This is because if you use the other ones, the exterior environment maps, it tends to add color to your mesh, which sort of throws the color off. You see, this one especially throws your colors off. So I tend to stick to a studio lighting like Studio 3, which adds a neutral white light, and you can see the details of your character. So to begin with, I'm just going to turn off the skin imperfection layer and turn off all these so we can start at the very bottom. Okay, just turn these off. Bear with me here. Okay, so if you hit C, you can flick through. Just hit. I tend to hit C to go to base color mode, and M to go back to material. So I'm going to be doing this a lot so you can see the variations to go a lot more better. So the first material the first layer is a material that I drag on, which is called skin face. This is just a smart material that I drag on. I always start with this layer. The only thing I tend to adjust is the base color. I set this to a sort of a pale skin. Then I change the SSS value and also mess around with the skin detailing. This just add a bit more detail to your character. So once that's done, I add a variation layer. So this variation layer is just a blank layer, not a fill, a blank layer. Then what I use the cheeks texture. These textures I'll be providing also. I drag this cheeks to my base color and paint it all around the character's face. So this just adds a bit more variation to your character. So I'll go to material mode so you can see. Turn that off. You can see adds a bit of breakup, and I also knock down the opacity. So the next layer is a bit more variation to the skin, just to offset it a little so it breaks it off a lot more. So this is just a red fill layer, so not a blank, it's just a fill. Set it to red, and I basically just go crazy and paint all over the face. So I add a black mask, not a bitmap, a black mask, and I use a dirt 3, or was it dirt 2, sorry. I use a dirt 2. I like the dirt 2 because it has a setting where it sort of randomizes the scale and randomizes the opacity for your brush, rather than using the soft brush. So I paint that all around the face, go crazy with it. Then I just mess around with the opacity. So this is it in material mode. Turn that off so you can see the difference. Turn that back on. Turn this back on. See. Okay, the next layer is the other techniques I was showing you where I add the curvature. So this is basically just a fill layer with a red. Then, sorry, let me just have a look here. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong layer. I was wondering why that wasn't showing. So yeah, we've added that layer. The next layer is the curvature layer. So this is basically just a fill layer with a black mask. So fill layer, black mask. Then in the black mask I put in a fill, so that I'll go to the bottom, and in the fill I add a curvature mask. Then the curvature map, I adjust the levels, and I sometimes blur, but as you can see I turned it off on this one. So if I turn it up, you can see the effect this is causing. It's adding more detail. I'm going to hit M so we can go back to material view. You can see it's adding a lot more detail to the pores. So if you go back to the bottom, you can see all these are adding to the whole aspect of the character. So as you can see, I put a folder. I put this layer in a folder. This folder is to mask out certain bits I didn't want, so I'll paint it off. So if it's too strong, I can paint off bits I don't want to see. Okay, so what I'm going to do is drag in my PureRef so we can have a look at the details I start to focus on. So I tend to have an image like this on the side so we can sort of see what I'm doing. Okay, so the next layer is the blue layer. Let me just make sure this stays. I think it's Control-Shift-A to make sure it stays there. Okay, by the way, if you don't know what the software is, It's called PureRef. I tend to use this to add a lot of images, and you can download it. It's free. It allows you just to put a lot of images, and you can also make sure it doesn't remove from your screen by hitting Control Shift A. Okay, so the blue layer is just another fill with black mask, and I knocked down the. You can see I knocked down the opacity very minimal. So this blue layer was to create sort of these effects on the skin. So you can see it's very subtle. So that's that layer done. The next layer is the yellow layer, which is basically the same thing. A fill, then I painted it over and also added a blur. So if I turn this up, you can see the effect this is having. Basically, to add a bit more variation of skin, I can go back to the material mode so you can see what's going on. Very subtle, very subtle. Okay, so let's go back to that. Next one is AO. So this AO mask is basically just a fill with a sort of a yellowish, palish yellow, and this is basically creating this sort of effect that this character has over here. You can see it. So I make sure it goes around the eyes, the nose, lips, and the ears, and it's basically just a fill with AO, a black mask in AO with a fill. Adjust the levels and also put a blur. So if I go to material mode, you'll be able to see that sort of effect. Turn it off. You see creating that effect. Let's go back to base color mode. Then that's also, that folder is just to mask out areas where I didn't want it to show. Okay, so this layer is basically like the other curvature I added. It's basically just a red with a curvature. So this is just to amplify the skin a lot more. It's a fill with a curvature. Adjusted the levels so the pores pop out a bit more. So if I go to material mode, you can see what sort of effect that adds to the character. Very subtle at the moment, but it will start to come, add more details as time goes on. Okay, so the next one is not a fill, it's a new layer. Then I used another one of my texture, and this texture is the nose texture. Nose. Okay, so clearly it's not on my thing, so what I'll do is just show you where I actually saved up these textures. I'm going to import them, and on the project files it should be in Substance Painter textures. So I'll just import all these and just click the top one, click the bottom one, you hold shift, textures, current session. So for that layer I just basically created a blank layer, drag the nose texture to my base color, then I painted it out in specific parts like the nose, the chin. So this just adds a bit more variation to your character. So I can go to material mode so you can see the effect that's having. You see all these little layers are adding, bringing the characters to life, putting more imperfections to the characters. Okay, so let's see. The next one is also, you can also see that sort of layer here. I can see it break up here. Trying to just replicate this. Okay, so again, this is just a fill layer with sort of a lip sort of color. I sort of color picked this. Put a mask, masked out around the lips. Just Alt and click on the mask to make sure it shows. So I'm going to go back to M so you can see. That's it on and off. Then go back to the base color mode. Okay, so that bit's created. The next layer is, so this layer is to add these. Can you see the pores on, well, not the pores, the line, the darker red lines on the lips? This is just to add more details to your lips. What I do is create a fill layer. As you can see, I'm always using the curvature map. I create a fill, add in the curvature, adjust the levels, blur it out so it's not so harsh, and knock down the opacity. So you can see it adds more details to your lips. Then go to material so you can see that clearly. See, adding a bit more details to your lips. Go to let's see so you can see that a lot more clearly. Okay, so in this character you can see the darker reds showing. Also there's a bit of white, which maybe his lips are a bit dry, so I wanted to do that as well. So I created another one. Oh yeah, by the way, these folders are to just mask out the lips, because if you put in the fill and mask out the curvature, it's going to go to the whole face. So I put in a folder and mask out that certain area. So I've done the exact same thing with the dry lips, put in a folder. So this one is just sort of a white. You don't need all these. Don't know why I put that on. Okay. Then I'll put a black mask with fill, levels, put in curvature, mess around with the levels so I can get the dry parts of the lips, and then masked out only the certain areas that I wanted to be dry in the folder. So that's how it looks in material view. So that mess around with it. Okay, so veins. Okay, so in the veins layer, you can see on this reference, it has a bit of, adds more imperfection to the face. I wanted to replicate that as well. So this layer was just a fill layer. Oh, sorry, no, it wasn't a fill layer. It was a fill layer. I was meant to say blank layer. It's actually a fill layer, and you put in red and add a black mask. And what I've done was use my veins alpha, not this one. I'll import it. So here again, I'll show you some of my resources. So go back to alphas, import, or I'll be providing all these. So set these to alphas, current session. So I use the veins and I just painted around where the veins would show, just like on these ones. Then I knocked down the opacity as well. So again, this is just another curvature map with dark red, fill, curvature, and what I did was mask out just certain areas where I wanted the pores to pop out a bit more. I'll go to material so you can sort of see all these layers sort of coming through. Very subtle, you can see these parts adding a bit more detail. You can see also with the veins as well, details are coming through. I didn't show you there before, so I'm showing you now. So the next layer I wanted to add, I know you can't see it here, but I wanted to add the sort of eyelid color. So that's what I've done here. So that's basically just a fill layer with a sort of pinkish. Then I masked that bit out. I've done the same with the tear duct. Masked out and painted that the tear duct. I'm sure you're getting it's just a repeat sort of process. Change the color, then mask out. So this is the ear variation. So for the ear variation, I wanted to add a bit of red to the. Just wanted to add a bit of red to the ears. So what I did was mask it out with AO. So I created a black mask, put in a fill. Then in the fill, I put in an ambient occlusion. So that sort of gives it an effect. So if I go to, you can see the sort of effect it's given. Okay. And that's basically the same like I've done with this bit. I added some veins to the ears, so it's just a normal fill layer, red. Then I used the vein brush to paint in those parts of the, could probably do to knock it down as well so it doesn't pop so much. You can go to material mode so you can see it. It's very, you want things to be very subtle at this point. Okay. So the light pores was basically like how we had with the face materials. it's just a palish. This is just to add more details to, or more dimension to your character. So these lighter colors, I create a fill layer, put in the Gaussian spots, procedural, so that's located over here. Just type in Gaussian, drag this one into a fill layer. Then I use triplanar, so it doesn't give you any seams. Then I messed around with the scale. You can probably do it like making it more. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Probably not. Increase the scale so it's a lot more subtle. So use white layers. Go to material mode, maybe you can really see it. Add a bit more details. So it sort of looks like whiteheads on the face. Okay, so this layer, I don't know why it's still there. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so that's the base skin part done. So what I want to do is transition this to the actual skin that I want. So I want it to be sort of pale. So I'm going to transition this pale skin into, well, yeah, this pale skin into the actual skin I want. So these details will pass through. So that's when I then create the imperfection layer, as you can see. So I'm just going to turn off all this so you can see all my layer details. Okay, so the first layer I create for the skin is the skin transition. So the skin transition layer is just basically picking the actual color you want. So I wanted to get something that's in between tan and pale. So I sort of chose a fill color that's sort of in between. Then for the transition, I added a black mask, put in a fill, and in the fill I put an AO. The reason I put an AO is because I wanted some parts of the underneath layer where we put all the veins and stuff that come through. So it's just transition it subtle and still show through, and you can also have the skin tone you want without it being too pale. So you can see sort of choosing the skin tone you want. So this, just think of this layer as you're actually painting your skin. So forget this is just the underneath, and now we're actually painting the skin. So the next layer is the lips, getting the actual color of the lips. So it's just a sort of a pinkish. Nose lips is not that pink, but artistic freedom allows you to do what you want. Okay, so lips are pink. Put in a mask. Then the next layer was a freckles layer. I just basically rubbed that from this idea because I liked the whole freckle idea. It looked cool, and I thought, why not? I'll put that on my character as well. So here you go. Could do to be a bit more subtle, but it's basically a fill layer with sort of an orange-ish tint to it. Then I put in the Gaussian spots. Make sure it's on triplanar so you don't have no seams. Not the opacity, probably knock it down a bit more, just add a bit more detail. So make sure you're looking at other people's work, get ideas, put those ideas into your work. It just makes your work look 10 times better. So that's that freckle layer done. Then the sunburn layer was just me going crazy. It's basically adding a bit of imperfection, like it's been sat in the sun for ages. I know it looks a bit blurry, but it just worked well for my character render. So why not go for what works, you know? So that's the red fill. Then I put in black mask, clouds. The clouds, always make sure when I put a procedural map on, what I always do is make sure it's on triplanar so you don't get any seams on your character. Then I adjusted the levels and masked out where I wanted it to be in a folder. So that's that bit done. Let's get that to this color. So the facial hair part. Oh, sorry. Let me just go to material. So we're seeing all these things coming together. So that's the sunburn reflection. I don't know if people would actually look like that when it's sunburn, but I thought, why not? It looks cool on my character. I'll do it. So the facial hair, it's sort of it's basically just a fill layer. Then I painted out the blues. It doesn't have, Lord Varys doesn't have facial hair. It just sort of has a 5 o'clock shadow around his chin. So I sort of added that in as well. Let's see. Okay. So that's basically the same thing. I must have duplicated it. So this sun imperfection layer is sort of to add a bit of effect like he's been in the sun for a while. So it's basically just a yellow layer, and I painted it out where I wanted it to be. So I painted it out around his eyes, his nose, and his forehead. So basically this technique is what people tend to do over on these parts, or they go too crazy and it ends up looking like an undead character, and you don't want that. You sort of want to build it up into layers, you know. So that's that sun imperfection layer done. And what I did is added veins to the underneath. That's when you start adding all these parts that are going to show up in your character, as well as the ones that are already showing up at the bottom. So I tend to knock this right down as well. Okay, so that's the veins. Let's go back so you can see the yellows popping through. You see how it's popping through? Adding details to your character, adding a lot more dimension. Okay, let's go back to base color mode. Okay, this is adding a bit more reds to the face and adding more imperfection, like he's been out in the sun. So this is just a red layer with a bit of craziness to it. So what you want to do is not, that's a bit probably too much, so I'll probably knock that down as well. So the next layer is called dark pores. So this is basically me amplifying. As you can see, it's just like a dramatic effect, amplifying the pores a lot more. Pale, yeah. Okay, so this is me, basically a fill layer with red, then a black mask with fill curvature. So if I turn this down, you can probably see how it is. That's it. Just the red parts of his face, levels to make it more intense. Then blurred it out so it's smooth and it doesn't look faceted like it did before. Then I painted out bits where I didn't want it to. Then the spots layer is just me adding a bit more variation, putting spots to his face. Lord Varys doesn't really have spots, but I thought, why not, you know? So let me just probably knock it down a lot more. So this is your artistic freedom. This is when you start bringing your character to life. It's always good to experiment with things. So I experimented with putting a bit of spots in the face. And this technique is good because you can have control. You can even go back and even make him look like an alien if you wanted. Or you can do that towards the end with that hue and saturation method that I showed you guys. So the next layer is light yellow. So this is me just amplifying around these eyelids, like you see with this one. He has a bit of yellow, so I thought, oh, I'll do that. That's cool. So that's just a fill layer with a mask. And this is me because I did the eyelid colors again because it's sort of faded. So I added that bit in. You can see these ones like very defined. So I did that with mine as well. And you don't want to be doing that. Okay. Look at cool artwork. This is cool. That's what you want. Yeah. Okay, so sorry for annoying. That's you want to put tear duct in it, paint that in as well. This is me putting more pores into the face. That's basically a fill layer, and just use the paintbrush, the dirt, to paint it out some pores in his face. I go to material mode so you can see all this. So it's all like a bloodshot effect, which tends to look nice on the character. That's just the mask where I painted it off. And yeah, that's the skin albedo done. You know, that's it. So next I'm just going to be talking about the other maps that you need to add to your character to add more dimensions, make sure it looks a lot better, like the roughness, the specular. So assuming you know how to bake your high poly, I'm just going to skip through that and show you the settings I actually use. So starting with normal map, I tend to leave this default depending on if I'm baking multiple parts of my characters. So just set this to always. Wall space normal, I set this to default. Ivy, I set this to default depending on if you're baking from ZBrush. I might change this to mesh Ivy polygroups to turn them polygroups into ID maps. Ambient occlusion I set to 128. Curvature I set this to I set this to default. Position I set this to default, and thickness I also set this to default. So once that's done, hit bake mesh maps. So without jumping the gun, I want to show you guys several techniques that I use while creating my character to amplify the pores and also the details of the character. So let's just create a base fill and make it look like skin. So turn all this off. Try to find the skin tone color. Okay. So the first is curvature map. I use curvature map to amplify the pores of my characters. So I'm just going to create a new layer. Just going to set color to red. And this is the important part. Add a black mask. Then add bitmap mask, sorry. Then search for curvature. So if you hit C, you can flick through the material mode and you can see the reds have been applied to my curvature. But what I do is tend to add the levels, invert it so the reds go on the actual pores and lines of your character's face. Then what I do is play around with the levels of it. I also might add a blur. I tend to add a blur, sorry. Then make it very subtle. Then what you want to do is knock down the opacity. So if you go back to material mode, you can see the pores have been amplified a lot more. So this is very good for amplifying the pores on character. So the next map I use is AO, ambient occlusion. I use AO to mask out areas or to add subsurface effects to my characters. So I do it just the same as I do with the curvature map. I create a fill. Just going to choose a very crazy color so you can see what I'm doing. Add a bitmap mask. Set this to AO occlusion. Add the levels, invert, and you can see the green is adding onto the AO parts of the character. I also mess around with opacity and look at it in base color mode. So another technique that I want to show you guys that most people don't know about is a way you can adjust every single layer of your character and adjust the color all at once without exporting it to Photoshop. Some of you might find this really helpful. I really find it helpful because I don't have to export to Photoshop. So to do this, you just want to create an empty layer. Set this to pass through. And what you want to do is add a filter. And the filter, let me turn all this off. Filter is HSL. So this is very good because you can adjust every single layer, the color and hue, the lightness, saturation, without actually having to export it to Photoshop. It basically allows you to compress in this layer and adjust the colors. So if you mess around, you can see you can change the whole colors of the layers. So this is very good. You can create alien skins. But what I tend to do is knock down the saturation and sort of get a pale skin tone. Depending on which character I'm doing, I might also mess around with the hue and saturation. So I hope you like those techniques and you've learned something new. In this section, I will be talking about how to create displacement maps and specific options you need to focus on to ensure displacement maps render out correctly. So as you can see, this is my final head sculpt. Every detail was hand sculpted with alphas. In future videos, I'll cover how to create hyper-realistic skin details. Displacement maps can be tricky to bake out if you don't put in the right options. One thing you need to make sure is your final mesh matches the mesh you were using in Maya accurately. The scale has to be exactly the same. So one way to do that, to make sure your ZBrush mesh matches your Maya mesh, is to put this to the lowest subdivision, export that to Maya, and you can possibly re-import it to ZBrush so it's consistent. So that's very important. You need to make sure that scales are correct. So to begin actually exporting displacement map from ZBrush, you want to obviously make sure your geometry has subdivisions. So mine's up to 7. So you want to go to Z plugin. I'm going to drag that over there. Go to multi-map exporter. Click on displacement because that's what we're going to be exporting. I'm rendering at 4K, so put that to 4K. Flip V, make sure that's on unless your UVs are going to be flipped. My export options, sorry, my file names. So I normally set this to UDIMs because it doesn't really matter. If you're just exporting one tile, it will still export that one tile. If you're exporting UDIMs, it will export it out to UDIMs. So just hit OK on that. Then the subdivision level is where you want to render it, well, where you want to bake it from. So I normally set that to 1. The higher it is, the longer it will take to bake out. So I set that to 1. I put on smooth UVs. I don't mess around with this option because if you set that to max, it's going to take a lot longer to bake out your displacement maps, and it's not going to be too much difference if you had it on 0. Some people set the mid value to 0.5. I tend to leave that at 0. I set to 32-bit and set it to EXR. And also you want to make sure your scale is at 1, your intensity at 0. Okay, so I'm just going to show you a pure ref of some of the issues some people have. I'm going to be providing this in the project files as well, but I'm going to show you some issues people have with displacement map. So some people have these issue where they export their ZBrush displacement map to Maya and they plug in the settings and they render it out and their character just looks bloated. A lot of people struggle with this issue. So as long as you follow these settings, it should be okay. So in Maya, I'm going to be showing this as I'm rendering it as well, but I just sort of wanted to go over this because we're talking about displacement map. So when you're in Maya, you want to make sure your subdivisions on Cat Clark free. Make sure smooth tangents are on. Enable auto bump. Another critical things people get wrong, which makes their displacement map look bloated like this, they don't set the color space to raw. And some people also do all these steps right, but there's just one button that will mess you up, and I went through periods of just getting frustrated, like wondering why my displacement wasn't working. It's this button right here. This button will mess you up, so you need to make sure that it's ticked. It sort of grayscales your value. So make sure that's ticked on. And once you hit render and these settings are correct, it should just work perfectly. So these settings I'm going to be providing as a PureRef file on the project files. So once all that's done, sorry, I don't know what's going on here, please don't crash. Okay, so once that's all done, you want to hit create maps and choose wherever you want to save it out. I've already exported out my map, so I'm not going to be exporting it out, but what you want to do is hit save, and that should be it done.